The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Wow, how do we get that bumper music in there? Is that going to be a red flag on YouTube when they hear that? All right, we have a really, really good book that we want to introduce you to. It is written by our next guest, Susan Welch. It is titled A Thread So Fine. It's an historical fiction novel. Susan is an historian, a researcher. She discovered nearly a decade ago that she was adopted, and she's on the phone. Women overcoming challenges from the 1940s through the present is the topic, but we'll probably go all over the place a little bit. Susan Welch, good morning, Susan. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
Good morning, Larry. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Where are you?
I am in Seattle, Washington.
Oh, my gosh. You got up early to be with us, huh?
I did get up early to be with you, but it's really my pleasure. We had a lovely day yesterday, and today's starting off a little less beautiful out there, but we'll get to Florida weather soon.
So I think the confusing part, this is a novel, but is it based on your personal story or the personal story of somebody you know?
No, it really isn't. It was really an imagination that came out of my own experience. As you mentioned in the lead, I discovered I was adopted about 10 years ago, and in an effort to sort of unpack that and understand it better and, you know, to try to put a new story kind of to my own beginning and who these women were, both my birth mother and my adoptive mother, I created the characters of Shannon and Eliza.
Oh, okay. So Shannon and Eliza are based on maybe an imaginary idea. Is one of them more closely resembling your adopted mother?
You know, I only met my adoptive mother 2 years ago, long after the book was, my birth mother.
Okay.
So she really, her actual character and her story has nothing to do with it. But my adoptive mother, Betty, yes, you could say she heavily influenced Shannon, mostly in the story around tuberculosis. My mother had suffered tuberculosis as a 19-year-old,
okay,
which is why she was told that she couldn't have children. But that part was a story that I wanted to tell from my mother's past.
And that was during the 1940s, so medicine was much different back then than now.
Yeah, exactly. I was born in 1962, so even that part of it is not a sort of a verbatim or an actual representation of my life. But my mother had tuberculosis in 1947. I think she was, removed from her family as a 18 or 19-year-old, told to lay in bed for a year, if you can imagine doing that when you're 18 years old.
Oh, my God.
And she had 4 major surgeries, where they removed 8 of her ribs, which was, what they did back before streptomycin was readily available.
So were you able to capture, and it sounds like from the reviews that you're able to capture the era. For a lot of people who lived through that, they can relive it in a way by what you've written.
I absolutely love that era. I love historical fiction overall, but that particular era, right sort of before World War II, all the way up to about 1960, I find fascinating because, I think we tend to look back on it with a great deal of nostalgia and romanticism sometimes, that sort of, mom working in the kitchen and dad going off to work kind of thing. But there was actually a lot of social turmoil going on at the time, along with a lot of optimism in the post-World War II sort of rebuilding of the economy and all of that. So it's a fascinating time by virtue of its turmoil and optimism, I would say, and I found that to be very rich as a setting.
And the personalities of Eliza and Shannon, even though they were called Irish twins, they each had their own mind and their own expectations for the rest of their lives, different.
Yeah. I don't know if you each have sisters or if you have siblings, but I am always fascinated by the evolution of relationship with my siblings. With my sister in particular, we were very different but very close as kids, and then we sort of grew apart. And now that we're in our 50s, we're very, very close again. It's just sort of where life takes you. And actually, we've lived very far away from each other for a long time, but now she's moving to be about 100 miles away from me. So, it's how that goes. And I think it's definitely how it goes for Shannon and Eliza in a more dramatic kind of way.
And Catholicism was very, very huge. It was like the forefront of the religion in those days. And you had people had different viewpoints, but they all seemed to come together.
Yeah, the religion, once again, I think post-World War II, society changing so rapidly, people having different, expectations of their life. Women had spent a lot of time working during the war, so after the war, there was sort of an expectation that they would be given opportunities. And, that kind of clashed in a way with the really strict mores of the Catholic Church in at least in the Midwest, I would say. That's what I speak to in the book. And once again, it makes for some very interesting storytelling, because on the one hand, your church is still presiding over sort of your cultural norms, but at the same time, you're running up against them. In the book, it's really kind of the question is forced upon Eliza, and I think she feels, unlike Shannon, I think Eliza feels quite betrayed by the church. Shannon finds her peace with the church and uses it as sort of a way to help her heal. So
I think part of it also is the dictates of a religion, whatever religion it may be, up against the backdrop of the culture of America in this case, and the evolution of the women's movement. I mean, everything that women have today, I mean, even though we still haven't maybe completely equalized everything, but back then you certainly weren't equal. So that all plays a part of it. It's almost like the struggles to see somebody come to fruition up against all those different things, and those are part of what you've captured in the story.
Yeah, I really love that piece of it, that thread in the story. I think people of that period, and maybe people of every period, they kind of they moved the ball forward in ways that they could, in the stricture of things that they couldn't change. And it is interesting. I think that maybe that's kind of the same. We're just at a different place in the continuum of that. Right now, interestingly. But certainly, they both women in the story, all four, actually, have their own struggle, their own sort of ball to move forward against. I don't want to say against. I think that it's an interesting dichotomy. I think the Catholic religion, or any religion, provides people a lot of comfort and a certain structure, and that can be wonderful. But when you find yourself outside of it, or when life throws you a curveball, it doesn't always, it doesn't always answer your questions.
How much of a curveball was it for you personally, finding out that you were adopted?
Oh boy, it was a curveball.
Yeah, I bet.
That's for sure. It was a curveball. But Larry, I often say that it was not like when my brother told me, and both of my adoptive parents had passed away, and my brother chose to tell me finally when I was about 46 years old, and I felt since that it wasn't like winning the lottery. And it wasn't like finding out I had a terrible disease, but it just rocked my world. Nobody else's world was rocked, just mine. But it wasn't, it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a good thing. It was news. And what it did was if anything, it really it challenged my identity. The story that I had told myself about my very beginnings, I had to rebuild. And, I was 46 and married and had children and a husband and all that. So my life was fine, but still, it really rocked me to the core.
Wow, I can't even imagine what your thoughts must have been. At 46, you're like you say, you're kind of settled and you're kind of everything's okay in your world, but all of a sudden the lady who you thought gave birth to you wasn't the same person.
Right.
And when did you meet your birth mother? Was it like shortly after that?
No, it was quite a journey in itself. It took about 8 years for me to finally meet my birth mother, and that was an absolute pleasure. And we're very much part of each other's lives now, and I know my new siblings, and it's just it's been quite a nice journey on that end. And you know, people sometimes ask me if I was angry with my parents. When I found out, but I absolutely was not. I really truly wasn't. They, you know, they had 3 children. I was in the middle, and my brother and my sister were birth children of theirs. So, as an adopted child in the middle, they chose not to tell me. But I'm also kind of struck that they weren't the same people I wasn't the exact same person that I thought I was, and they weren't either. I never really gave them the credit for sitting around the table and saying, hey, you know, let's adopt a baby. I just didn't think that intentionality was sort of part of them, and it was quite impressive.
Yeah, that's kind of a healthy way of looking at it, I think. Yeah,
and that's kind of what you evoke in the character of Eliza, because she has a secret also, and she needs to suppress that secret because she's becoming a caregiver.
She definitely needs to suppress. You mean Shannon with her role, or Eliza? Anyway, they both have secrets.
Yeah, but Eliza was her assault.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She Eliza spends her whole life trying to suppress a secret, and that is a very difficult thing to do. And of course, you know, in my own family, there were secrets that were suppressed, and I find that somewhat tragic. I think it was hard on my brother to keep that secret all of those years. And I can tell you it was certainly hard on Eliza in the book. It pretty much, you know, changes the trajectory of her life for quite a long time.
Her secret was that she was raped, right? Am I remembering wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
no, you've got it. Yep, you've got it.
Oh, okay. So her secret is a secret because why? Why was it a secret in her case? It was a shame.
In her case, you know, her sister Shannon was in hospital for quarantine, very risky, possibly going to die. And Eliza, who was the younger one, but the sort of smarter and stronger sister, you know, she had that role. She felt very deeply that she needed to not share that because it would be too much pressure on the family to bear it. And especially because her attacker was sort of a very prominent person in the community. She felt that she could not possibly throw that additional burden on her parents and her sister and her brother because it would just crack the family, you know, even further. And they were undergoing. Yeah.
And when you since the setting is in the 1940s, illegitimate children were looked at differently, unwed mothers were looked at differently back then, but now it just seems today it just seems to be the norm of things.
Well, it certainly has normalized quite a lot, that's for sure. I think that the stigma around it in terms of the Catholic kind of shame has changed a lot, at least in most segments of society. But certainly back then there was shame, and there was stigma, and there was sort of a whole system set up to sort of sweep these young women sort of out of, you know, the public eye and hide them, if you can imagine. It sort of seems just horrible by today's standards. And then they were expected to sort of come back into society and pretend like nothing had happened.
I know.
At all.
I know. Yeah, one of the things that the Me Too movement has done, I think, for all of us, is it gives women especially, but you know, obviously there's some exceptions to that, but it gives women especially an understanding that what happened to them is nothing to be ashamed of. I've shared this with this audience before. My own sister went through this when she was 11. She was raped by one of our cousins who was probably in his 20s already at that point. And it was hard to... She kept it a secret for, oh my gosh, I would say 30 years or more before she.
Oh man!
I know, and you just know when you look back on a person's life that must have been why she behaved the way she did sometimes, or the way she chose the partners that she did choose. The guys in her life were, I think I read somewhere one time from Psychology Today or something that when that happens to a woman, they don't share it, they don't get it out of their system, don't let people know that they don't believe they're worth anybody who's really any good. Not to say that the guys were horrible, but she just had a hard time. It was a hard life for her.
I had a similar situation in my extended family as well, and you're right. When you look at it, once you realize it, you can understand, not only how their lives were changed, but that sense of self-worth and that sort of need sometimes to protect other people. You don't want to put your family through that. You don't want, to upset the apple cart. It's a huge burden, and I think many, many women in particular bore that kind of sort of tragedy in their lives. And certainly Eliza has a really hard time picking or choosing, even being involved with men for quite a long time.
Has your book been out long enough that you're getting feedback from some of those people?
It's been out for a month, almost 24 days, and I am starting to get some very positive reviews. It's been really fun. The thing that I think I enjoy the most is talking with people about the themes in the book and about how society has evolved for good in a lot of ways since the 1940s, and what challenges we still have. When it comes to the sexual assault, I think that we have removed at least the Catholic stigma, but I think the economic stigma and the economic realities for a lot of women, force them still to be quiet and not seek the support that they might need.
And you've done an astronomical amount of research with this story. You even introduced us to Mrs. Frances Perkins.
She's my favorite. I absolutely really enjoyed discovering Frances Perkins and diving deep into this woman's life. She was an absolutely remarkable contributor to all of our lives. She basically is responsible for Social Security and a lot of other elements of the New Deal, child labor laws, immigrant labor laws. A remarkable woman who herself in her own life balanced work life in a way that can be considered sort of a model for all of us.
So she must have been somebody you admired to bring an actual historical figure into a work of fiction. It helps us maybe learn a little bit about history, for one, and second of all, I guess against the backdrop of the story itself, you almost can see why. If this is a sampling of what life was like back then, you can see why Frances Perkins chose to do some of the things she did.
Yeah, she was, I guess you could describe her as a first-wave feminist, and she dedicated so many decades of her life to political and social work that she actually could, I suppose, be described as a first-wave and a second-wave feminist. She was really a remarkable woman, and I didn't know about her, I have to say. When I started framing out my novel, I discovered her because I was looking for a character to serve as a mentor to Eliza. And that's where that came from. I discovered her I think I was looking for a name, actually, and all of a sudden, squirrel, I'm off doing all sorts of research on Frances Perkins.
That's interesting, right? That's almost supernatural, right? The fact that you were led to her, right?
Oh, yeah, yes. In fact, I have to say that the father's character was named Francis in the beginning, and I had to change his name so that I could bring Frances Perkins into the book.
Well, you've really made a name for yourself, though, internationally. Gosh, you've got such a career in the brewing industry, and you're focusing on agriculture. You're really making the place a better world for those that are following you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm deeply involved in the craft brewing industry. I sell malt, which is a product that comes from barley, and there are all sorts of things that are happening in the world of agriculture to sort of deal with global warming issues and better management of the soil and things like that. So the company that I work with is focused on that end of the spectrum, all in the effort to make good beer.
We had a story this morning. I think Robin's looking for it right now. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
We had a craft brewery in Gainesville, which is where the University of Florida is, and they used the yeast that they rubbed off of the belly of a brown butterfly.
Yes.
Really?
I don't know. I mean, that's what it says in the story, and then they just can reproduce it in the petri dish and makes it sweeter or flowery or something.
They like the flowery fragrance.
Oh my gosh, that is really interesting. Yeast is all of a sudden something that a lot of brewers are exploring. There's one that I read about in Israel yesterday that is using yeast that is thousands of years old that they discovered. So yeah, beer is an incredible incredible product.
When you're writing the story, like you alluded to earlier, you had to have a lot of emotion to be able to write something so real.
Yeah, this book was, I suppose, first and foremost cathartic, and gave me a mechanism to understand the challenges that women like my mother and birth mother might have faced as young girls, especially. And through that understanding and through this sort of these imaginary characters, I did a lot of healing about my own journey. Rewrote the beginnings of my own story with a greater understanding of the women who played such an important role in it.
And is the St. Paul Catholic Infants Home, is that still around right now?
No, it's not around anymore. I think the Minnesota. It's right. It was right near the cathedral in that very beautiful city of St. Paul. It's not there anymore. It actually opened later than I have it in the book. It opened in 1954, I believe, but it was around for a good long time in that location. The agency itself opened in 1911 and was did a lot of great work. I hate to sort of put it out there that these were horrible, sinister places. For a lot of women, the Catholic Home for Infants was a saving institution, provided prenatal care for people that were economically challenged and all of that. But in the 1940s and in the 1950s and 60s, it really was a place where young women were sequestered, whether they liked it or not, in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. And I was actually, as far as I can tell from my own records, my first days were spent there. The first couple of weeks of my life, I believe, I was actually housed at that place.
Yeah, could be. Well, I think your book has a classic feel to it. I don't know if anybody's told you that before. It just has that feel to it. I think this is going to be a book people will be reading 20 years from now still. I have a copy of A Thread Is So Fine. I'd like to give it away. If you would like it, give me a call at 622-9622. We'll just pick one caller at random and leave the book here for you. The rest of us have to go buy it. I did find it on Amazon. You're getting really good reviews on Amazon, by the way. Do you have a different website you'd like to direct us to?
You can also buy books at SusanWelchAuthor.com directly. Barnes & Noble. I love independent bookstores. If you can go and order it, if you want a hard copy, and you can wait for a few days, if they don't carry it. But yes, Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble. It's wherever you buy your books.
Okay, let me take this call and give the book away. I don't think you'll be able to hear the caller, Susan, but let me just click on this. I don't think it's hooked up to be able to hear each other. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
This is Jennifer.
Jennifer, you've got the book. It'll be waiting here for you, okay?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Susan, are you still there? Oh,
yes.
Yeah, good. I don't know. Could you hear the caller?
No, but I heard that her name was Jennifer, and Jennifer, I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Susan. That was a really great interview. The book is astounding. It's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
Oh, Thank you both so much. It was really a pleasure. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. Governor Ron DeSantis has signed